So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Reading Solutions UK's first International Reading Conference. For those who haven't heard of Reading Solutions, they work with schools to improve pupils' reading fluency, stamina and comprehension through their online reading development program, Reading Plus. So my name is Christina Gavitas and I'll be hosting the conference for the next few days. I'm an author and I'm the founder of Children's Literature Festivals charity and a patron of Blackburn with Darwin Libraries for children and young people. And I was really excited when I was contacted about hosting this conference, because a lot of the content in here resonates with me and I'm really interested to hear what the speakers have to say. As a struggling reader myself, in my earlier years, we all have different coping mechanisms and we know a lot more now than when I was younger. So I'm really interested and looking forward to listening to Tim Rasinski for his session today. So Tim will be sharing the evidence of the importance of reading fluency and discussing proven methods for promoting fluency in students of all ages. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat box throughout, and Tim will aim to answer them at the end of his session. The Reading Solutions team will be monitoring the chat box, so if you have any questions for the end organisers, we will pass on and I'll read the questions out and we'll ask him those questions for you. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Tim, who is the author and professor of reading education at Kent State University in the USA. Over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Christina, and welcome everyone. Good morning from here in the United States. Of course, it's the mid-afternoon in the United Kingdom. So it's kind of interesting that we are able to do this nowadays. Christina, just a quick question to you. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay, so here we are. Teaching reading fluency is the topic. I've got a lot of slides, so I'm just going to jump right in. And I'm glad they're recording this event because if you'd like to go back and listen to it again, you certainly can. I talk pretty fast, as you'll see in a second here. I'd like to note here as we begin, my email address, my website, and my Twitter feed are listed there. So if you have a quick camera to take a photograph of that, or I can get that to you at a later time here. I do want to mention, do a call out for my book, the Mega Book of Fluency. If this topic resonates with you, you might be able to, well, you will be able to find more about it in this book that I wrote a couple years ago with actually a teacher from Arizona. 3 years ago, it won the Teacher's Choice Award, which of course is the pinnacle here in the United States for educational material, and it's gotten some really great reviews. So don't want to be overly commercial, but this is something that has been well received here in the United States. Here's my website, timrasinski.com. I'm going to make that homework if you have a chance this evening or tomorrow. Particularly click on where it says resources, because you'll find a lot of additional materials. In fact, there's a handout for today's presentation. You can see that where the green arrow is. You can click on that, print it out, and follow along with me if you were to look at the recording of this video. Okay, we're going to start with our fluency exercise. I run a reading clinic for struggling readers here at my university, and we find that fluency is a huge issue. And so we make sure that fluency is covered. And one way we do that is with a song. So I'd like to start with a song that I really like a lot. I share it with kids and teachers around their Earth Day back in April. And it was actually written by a person who was a teacher at one time. And if you know the song, sing along with me. Here's how it goes. It's called the Garden Song. Inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rain comes tumbling down. Then it goes into a couple of verses here. Plant your rows, straight and long, seasoned with a prayer and song. Mother Earth will make you strong if you give her loving care. Old crow watching from a tree, he's got his hungry eyes on me. In my garden, I'm as free as that feathered thief up there. Back to the chorus, inch by inch, row by row, gonna make this garden grow. Gonna mulch it deep and low, gonna make it fertile ground. Inch by inch, row by row, please bless these seeds I sow. Please keep them safe below till the rain comes tumbling down. Isn't that a great song? You notice that I mentioned up there right at the top, it's a metaphor. Not only is this a great song for Earth Day, but it's a great song for teaching. If I think about the best teachers I know, they're gardeners. You are there, you know, you're not a factory worker, you're a gardener. You plant the soil, you plant the seed, you nurture the soil, you water the plant, and that child grows on his or her own as a reader. So it's a wonderful metaphor, wonderful for teaching ourselves. If you're interested in the song, you can find it simply by Googling garden song, and it'll pop right up. It's actually got several verses to it. Now, you might be asking, why sing? Why sing? Well, there's actually several reasons, and I'm not going to go into all of them except one. And the main reason is it's reading. What are you doing when you sing a song? You have the words in front of you. You're actually reading some of the very best material for developing not only fluency, but also word recognition, vocabulary, all those skills that are so important for developing as a reader. I'd like to tell you a little story here. Several years ago, actually, beginning in 2009, I've been lecturing in New York City at Teachers College from one of our famous universities here. And we start with some songs about New York City. We'll have Manhattan, the Bronx, and Staten Island too. It's lovely going through the zoo. One of the great songs about New York. And so we sing a couple of these before we start my lecture. What happened 10 years ago was, this was in August of 2009. The following April, I received an email from a teacher who had attended that lecture. Her name was Becky Awasaki. And this is what she wrote to me. She's a first grade teacher. That is, she works with 6-year-olds. And she said, I challenged myself in October to begin singing with my students, and we've been singing ever since. I've never seen so much progress in reading. Every one of my first graders are reading on grade level or higher, and they love to sing. She said in her 20 plus years of teaching first grade, that had never happened, where every student ended the year reading at a level where they were supposed to be or higher than that. What could he attribute it to? Well, she said the only thing we did different was we would bring in 2 or 3 songs every week, put them on display so students saw the words and practice them. And every Friday we would have a little sing along and invite parents and the school principal to come in and celebrate with us. They were reading, right? And reading some really great stuff. If you're interested, Becky and myself actually wrote this up as an article that appeared in the journal, The Reading Teacher. You can find it actually on my website, timrasinski.com, under resources. It's called Let's Bring Back the Magic of Song for the Teaching of Reading. You can find it on my website if you'd like to learn more about Becky's story. But more and more of that, just last year, I happened to get this note, Twitter note from a teacher who was a interventionist, and she wrote about this working with her own students from 6-year-olds all the way up to 11-year-olds. And she said, bringing in this one song, the garden song, she felt like she was making more progress in just a few days. She was bringing in this joyous text than they had made the whole year long there. This is what we want, and I want to emphasize that notion of joy. We want reading to be a joyful activity for our students. It's not just a skill; it's something that should be lifelong for our students, all our students. And it's not just poetry. It's also song. It's also poetry. There's something about these kinds of materials. It's the rhythm, the rhyme, the repetition that make them so accessible for our young students and our struggling readers, that make them easy for these children to be successful on, easy to learn. How many of us as adults remember songs and poetry that we learned years ago? And yet, if you were to hear the first line, you would remember the entire text. That's the beauty of these kinds of texts. And I'll have more to say about this as we go through this. But not only reading, but also for writing as well. Here in the United States, and I'm not sure if it is true in the UK or not, but this coming Sunday is Father's Day. And there's another first grade teacher friend of mine who does a lot of songs, had her children write letters to their fathers for Father's Day. And she was really tickled because many of the letters the children were writing were influenced by the songs they were singing. Here's my favorite. It's by a little boy by the name of Ricardo. He writes, Dear Daddy, I love you so much, Daddy, because you play ball with me and you come to the park with me. You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are gray. You'll never know, dear, how much I love you. And then he changes the last line, please don't ever go away. And then he throws in some Billy Joel. I love you just the way you are. This is what we want in schools. This is as parents and teachers, that heartfelt expression. And I think that song and poetry can do that. So that's my first thing I want to mention to you is these rhythmical texts to bring them in. And as I said, we'll come back to them in just a second. I'm going to start, first of all, with a problem here in the United States. And I would argue also true in the United Kingdom and around the world, the English-speaking world. And the problem is reading achievement. What you're looking at here is a chart that reflects our fourth graders here in the USA, our reading achievement over from 1992 to 2019. These are fourth graders or 10-year-olds. One of the things you should notice is things haven't changed over those 27 years. Pretty flat, despite wonderful efforts that have been made at every levels of our government, as our school systems here in the United States. So despite these efforts, we haven't seen much in the way of improvement. And not only that, not only lack of improvement, we know that about 2/3 of our children are reading at a level that is considered just basic or below basic. 2/3 that are not even at a level considered proficient. So we've got our work cut out for us here in the United States. And my conversations with colleagues in the United Kingdom indicates that it's not much different there for you folks as well. So here's my model of reading. My model of reading says that comprehension is the goal of reading. But to get to comprehension, we have to master two of these foundational skills: word study, which includes phonics, spelling, vocabulary, and reading fluency there. And I'd like to share with you a study that was done several years ago by a colleague of mine, Sheila Valencia, at the University of Washington in Seattle. And she looked at children who performed poorly, third and fourth graders, 9 and 10-year-olds who performed poorly on these mandated reading tests that we have here in the United States. These are tests that children read passages silently and they answer some questions to test their comprehension. And she was interested in the children who perform poorly, basically asking the question, why are these children having problems with silent reading comprehension? And here's what she found. 75 to 90% of these kids who exhibit problems in reading comprehension also exhibited problems in word recognition, both phonics and vocabulary, word meaning, and also reading fluency, that area that's highlighted green, the ability to recognize words automatically and the ability to express yourself in oral reading with good expression. Imagine that upwards of 90% of our 9 and 10-year-olds here in the United States have problems in reading comprehension, or who have problems in comprehension have problems that are actually related to those skills prior to that, word study and reading fluency. So this is what I'd like to chat with you about today: teaching fluency and to some extent word study, not because they are in and of themselves important, although they are, but more importantly because they will improve reading comprehension, the goal of reading here. So we're going to start first of all with word study, phonics, spelling, because before you can get into fluency, you have to have some degree of proficiency with words. And I would like to start with this notion of games. This is a blog that we have here in the United States, and I think you can get it in the UK. It's called Edutopia. It's free, and they have some interesting articles. A couple years ago, or just last year, does our natural affinity for games have a place in our classrooms? And of course, the answer was yes, of course it does. But it got me thinking about, all the games that we play as adults. When you get together with family and friends, how often do you pull out a game that is a word game? Scrabble, Boggle, Balderdash, Wheel of Fortune, Password, Buzzword. If you and I like to play games with our family and friends, and so many of these games are word games, wouldn't children? And of course, that's the point I want to make here, that maybe we should think about our phonics and vocabulary and spelling programs to some extent as a word game. In fact, this is one my wife and I play. It comes in our local newspaper. They give us a word. In this case, you might see that word jasmine. And what we do is we set the kitchen timer for 10 minutes, so we make as many words as we can out of letters in jasmine. And of course, whoever loses, they have to do the dishes that night. And I have to tell you, I do my fair share of dishes. But I'd like to share with you a different word game, type of word game that actually is based on science. You can see this article. It's called from a journal called Scientific Studies in Reading several years ago. What they did in this study was they were working with beginning readers who were struggling. They're struggling comprehension, but the problems was with fluency and with word recognition. So imagine yourself as a beginning reading teacher, and you're working with 4 or 5 children. Each one of them have these 4 letters in front of them as little letter tiles. Class, that word is past. Now, what we want to do is we want to go from past to pat. What sound do you hear in past that is not in pat? Oh, it's the S sound, so you take it out. And you have pat. Now, let's change a letter, and let's go from pat to pot. You boil water in a pot. Where does the sound change? Beginning, middle, or end? Middle, and on and on. So what we're doing here is we're changing a letter, we're adding a letter, going through and making 6, 7, 8 words at a time, simply by manipulating one letter, one sound at a time. What they found in this study was this. Kids who did this on a regular basis, 5 or 10 minutes per day, compared with children who were in alternative intervention, they found that these children doing this showed greater improvements in phonological awareness and word decoding or phonics. But also one other thing as well, also comprehension. You know, if you can decode the words and you know what the words mean, you're more likely to understand. Well, I did what all teachers do. I turned that into a word game. In fact, how many of you are playing Wordle now? It's really crazy here in the United States. In fact, there was an article that was appeared just in one of our journals not long ago, what Wordle reminds us about effective phonics and spelling, written by one of our leading researchers here in the US, Nell Duke. And here's what she had to say. She actually did a shout out to me. She wrote, Tim Rasinski, a professor of literacy education, incorporates meaning-based clues into his word building activity. And I'll actually do it even, go into more detail. Let's actually do one of these word ladders here. That's what she was referring to. So this is an activity that I took based upon that study that I shared with you earlier. I tweaked it. I do what all teachers do. We tweak things. So if you had a sheet of paper with you, you might actually want to do this one with me. We're going to start with the word planet. And what I'm going to do is guide you through the process of making a series of words here. So take the word planet and take away one letter and make a vehicle that flies in the sky. That would be a plane. Take away another letter and make a word that means to prepare. All teachers need to plan. Take away another letter and make something you might fry fish in. That would be a frying pan. Now I'm going through this pretty quickly, but hopefully if I were doing this with children, we'd be talking, through this a little bit more. Change the vowel in pan and make a small metal object that holds 2 pieces of cloth together. That's a pin. Change a letter in pin to make a religious term for a bad deed. That's a sin. Change a letter in sin now and make a word that is a kind of drink. Now, I'm sure you in the UK are probably thinking gin, but it's not quite their time yet. It's sip, a small drink. Okay, so make sure that if you do this with kids, you're thinking about a small drink. Change a letter in sip to make what you're doing in a chair right now. You sit. Change a letter in sit to make what a cricket player does with his bat. They make a hit, right? Change a letter in hit to make what you wear in your head in the inclement weather. That would be a hat. Add a letter to hat to make what you need your furnace to make more of. When it's really cold outside, you need more heat. Add a letter to heat to make something my cardiologist checks on me every year. That's my heart. Add a letter to heart to make a fancy fireplace. Oh, kids won't know that one, so they'll need some help with hearth. And finally, last but not least, take away a letter from hearth to make a word that goes with our first word. And that, of course, would be planet Earth. Earth Day, happy Earth Day. So this is kind of my unofficial theme for my talk today. But what I do is I try to make these first and last words go together. Here's another one. You might want to try this a little easier. We start with the word kin, another word for family, and we work our way down from king to sing, sting, and so on. We end with the word pump. Now you might be asking yourself, what do those 2 words have to do with one another? Pump and kin? Oh, put them together, you get what? Pumpkin. Happy Halloween. This would be a good one for October. In fact, here's one more. How about this one here? We start with the word London, and we work our way down to that last word, G-L-A-N-D, Gland. What do you think that last word might be? Of course, that would be London, England. Actually, I wish I were in London, England right now rather than Kent, Ohio, but we'll just have to say that for another time. So that's what these are. And I don't want to overdo it, but these word ladders have been really a big hit in the United States. And I just learned that they're going to be available next month in the United Kingdom. They had to be rewritten or modified to reflect British spelling as opposed to our American spelling. But if you're interested, they should be available soon. This is actually what they look like. If you actually go to my handout sheet, you'll find this one here. It's on page 8. And I want to mention it because a teacher once shared with me that these seem like a crossword puzzle for kids. You've got the clues, you've got the number of letters, and the words are interlocked with each other, much like a crossword. And I also had somebody tell me once that, Rasinski, I don't know anybody who likes to do crossword puzzles who doesn't, have a large vocabulary, is not a good reader, not a good speller. I actually do these now virtually in schools. This is a school I did in South Prairie in Illinois. I did this virtually, and we just had a lot of fun doing it. And what's neat about this is that eventually children can make their own word ladders. This was a 9-year-old. He started with the word shark and ended with the word fish. And although it looks a little sloppy, think of what this young man had to do in order to actually create this word ladder. He had to think about the spelling, he had to think about the meaning to the words, all those things. Paul Wilson was the former director for the Center of Study of Reading here in the United States, and he's now a tutor. He's retired. And he wrote to me because he's been doing this with his own students and saying how much kids love doing these, but it gets them to think about the internal structure of words. And we actually have a special name for that. We call that orthographic mapping. Those of you who've been studying the science of phonics, that's what we want kids to do, is actually get into the structure of words. And these kinds of activities actually get them there. So we want to teach word study. But if you look at this little model of reading that I started with, this one here, there's a big gap between word study and comprehension. Something's missing. And of course, that something is reading fluency. So let's jump right into reading fluency right now. It's kind of a bridge. It's actually been described as a bridge between word recognition and comprehension at the other end here. Now, it's actually made up of 2 sub-competencies, fluency is: automaticity and word recognition, and prosody and expressiveness. And that's what complicates it a little bit, because it's actually these 2 separate things. Automaticity is the ability to recognize words so effortlessly, so automatically, that when a student is reading, they're not really paying attention to the words. The words are automatically recognized. And what that means is students can devote their attention to comprehension where it really needs to be here. I'd like to tell you that I wrote the book on reading fluency, but actually I've written several books. But what I want to tell you is that I wrote the chapter on reading fluency for the Handbook of Reading Research. And the reason why I mention that is we here in the United States, and I think in the UK, are focusing on the science of teaching reading. And what I can tell you is there's a good, solid base of science that supports fluency. In fact, our US Department of Education did a study just a couple years ago, and they found in this study with 10-year-olds that there is a strong relationship between comprehension and reading fluency. So that's something that we know is important. We know the National Reading Panel in the United States identified it as one of those key elements here. We have a standards here in the United States, and reading fluency is among those standards. I'm going to go back here just for a second, and you'll notice that this standard is grades 1 through 5, or ages 6 through 11. But do you think if students get beyond age 11 and they're not fluent readers, it's that problem disappears? And of course, it becomes a challenge. It becomes an albatross that hangs around their neck all the way, perhaps for the rest of their lives. Here's a study we did with secondary school students, children who are teenagers having difficulty with reading fluency. So as I mentioned, this notion of automaticity, the ability to recognize words so automatically, so effortlessly that you don't pay attention to the words as much as you pay attention to the meaning of the text. I'm going to give you a little test here. So you're going to have to really focus on the screen here. I'm going to show you some words, and your job is simply to read these words, okay? So if you're ready, I'm going to do a countdown, and you read them. So here we go. 3, 2, 1. Did you get the word? Dog, okay. 3, 2, 1. President, okay. 3, 2, 1. Canada. Okay, here's one more. This is actually 2 words, so might be a little more challenging. 3, 2, 1. You didn't have any trouble with that one, did you? United Kingdom. Okay, one more. 3, 2, 1. Did you get that one? I hope you had a little bit of trouble with that one. The word is biblioclept. It's a real word, and what it means is somebody who steals books. I hope maybe to some extent we're all bibliocleps. Well, what's going on here? What's going on here? Well, with those first 4 words, you recognize those automatically. And if they were in a text, you could devote your attention to comprehension, the meaning that the author was trying to tell you. However, with biblioclept, yeah, you could sound it out, you could figure out the meaning of it, but you'd have to use a little bit more energy, mental energy, mental capacity. And that is now mental energy that cannot be devoted to comprehension. And as a result, comprehension suffers. Imagine if every 5th word a student read was like this. They could sound it out, but they had to really work at it. It's not enough to be able to be accurate with your words. You have to be automatic. And you get that way through practice. Now, the way we measure automaticity is speed of reading. You might, I'm sure you probably do something like this in the UK. If you're working with 9-year-olds, say, for example, at the 50th percentile, you would expect a 9-year-old to read grade appropriate material in January, the winter months, at about 92 words correct per minute. By spring, they should be up to 107 words correct per minute. That would be an indication that they're adequately automatic in their word recognition there. But the problem is with this is that we don't teach automaticity by working on reading speed. Here in the United States, we have many well-meaning teachers who try to develop automaticity by getting out the stopwatch and getting kids to read faster. And what happens is kids get to read faster, but they don't become better readers. We want kids to develop reading automaticity the way you and I developed automaticity, which is we read a lot, lots and lots and lots of practice. So we really want to shy away from that notion of let's try to read faster than the day before. If you become automatic in your word recognition through lots of practice, you will automatically improve your speed here. Now, the problem with fluency, though, as I mentioned, is it's actually made up of these 2 sub-competencies. The other one is called porosity. That's a linguistic term, what it refers to as expressiveness. If I think about somebody who's a fluent reader, it's not somebody who reads fast, it's somebody who uses their voice to make meaning. I love this quote by the poet Maya Angelou. Words mean more than what is set down on paper. It takes the human voice to infuse them with shades of deeper meaning. And here's a nice example of that I use a lot. The word dude, our young people use it a lot. It can mean different things depending upon how you express it. If you were to say hello, or a teenager would, it'd be dude, right? But if you were to express consternation and disappointment, it might be dude. If you're to ask a question, it would be dude. If you just won the lottery, it'd be dude. It's the same word, but it expresses different meanings depending on how you say it. And by the way, how you phrase it. Here's a sentence. Read the sentence to yourself. You know the words, you know the meaning to the words. Do you know what the sentence means? Probably not. And the reason is this notion of prosody or phrasing. You want to phrase it this way, the old man, in which case, where's the verb, right? What you have to do is phrase it slightly different and read it this way. The old man the boat. A bunch of old people are getting on a boat. And of course, it's a contrived sentence, but it shows that, good readers have to phrase a text. And if you think about children who are not so fluent readers, they tend to read in that word by word manner. The old man, the boat, they don't phrase anything. So we want to develop that phrasing as well. The way we measure this prosody, is a rubric. This is a rubric that you'll find on my website, timrasinski.com, under resources. It's free, downloadable, shareable, and what you do is listen to children read and rate them on this 4-point scale: expression, phrasing, smoothness, and pacing. And you rate them on 1 to 4. We really need to trust ourselves as teachers because we're really good at this. We listen to kids read all the time here. To what extent does fluency predict comprehension? That's the main question here. And based upon the research I've looked over, upwards of 80% of the comprehension can be attributed or explained by reading fluency. 20 to 80%. Imagine that. Even that low number, that low percentage, 20%. If we could improve our students' comprehension by 20%, that would be a game changer for so many of our students. So how do we teach fluency? Well, first of all, we need to devote time to it. I would like to say 15 to 20 minutes per day. I know in a classroom, time is precious, but hopefully we could find, up 15 to 20 minutes per day to devote to this. And what do we do during that 15 to 20 minutes? Well, here's the tools. They're expressed on page 13 of my handout, which you would find on my website. We need to model fluent reading for our kids. What I mean by that is we need to read to kids. We need to read to kids because it's important. Kids not only, our children develop comprehension and vocabulary by reading to them. They get a notion of what fluent reading is like. When I read to children, and I do it all the time, we often talk about Mr. Rasinski's reading. Did you notice how I changed my voice when I became a different character? What were you thinking when I got really loud here? But what were you thinking when I got really soft? And I want kids to notice that I was using my voice to make the meaning. And of course, the message to them is they need to do the same thing. Okay, but that's not, modeling fluent reading. We're doing the reading. So the next thing we need to do is assisted reading. That's where we share the reading with students. I like to compare it to riding a bike. When I was a young boy and had a bike, I had a lot of trouble with it and took my father to come home from work. And of course, he helped me. He would hold me up, hold the seat of the bike and run along with me while I rode. And eventually, a few times around the yard, I was able to ride on my own. Well, it's the same thing in reading. If I can't read something by myself, I can read it with somebody who helps me, who reads with me. And that can take a variety of forms. Probably the most common form is choral reading there. And there's some really good programs in the UK that are actually doing this. Hertfordshire. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but those folks there are doing some great stuff with choral reading. I'm not a good reader. You are. We read something together, maybe a poem every day. And eventually I'll be able to read that without your help. What I love about choral reading is it can take a variety of forms. Everybody reads. Echo choral reading, that's where I read a line as a teacher and you read it back to me. Or we can break it into parts. Girls do this part, boys do this part, and so on and so forth. Creating this variety makes it more interesting. But again, the point is that when we read together, those students who are the good readers, along with the teacher, are providing the support for those students who are not the good readers. Paired reading is basically choral reading with two people. We used to call it neurological impress method. That's what that NIM stands for. If you're not familiar with it, all you need to do is go to YouTube and search paired reading. Here's just a couple examples. It's actually developed by Keith Tobbing, who is a professor of psychology at the University of Dundee in Scotland. He's a good friend of mine, and he's really helped me a lot with this. But basically, he developed it as a parent tutorial, asking parents to sit side by side with their children and read out loud together for 10 minutes. What Keith found in his research was parents who would do this, and by the way, it doesn't have to be parents, it could be children, or it could be teachers, or it could be volunteers in your classroom. But 10 minutes a day of doing this, reading out loud together chorally, resulted in an acceleration in reading by a factor of 3. That is, children who were previously making a half month's progress in reading for a month's worth of instruction were now making 1.5 months progress in reading simply by adding this in here. Even caption television. What happens when you watch television with the captions on? You're seeing the text and you're hearing the text at the same time. Back when the pandemic started, parents and teachers were looking for something parents could do to help their children who were, stuck at home. Natalie Wexler, a journalist, wrote about this idea of caption television, an easy way to help children at home. Turn on the captions. And in fact, what I found is so many of the songs and poems that you can find on YouTube all you have to do is when you search for them, put in with captions. Remember the song we started with, inch by inch, row by row? Here you see it with on the captions on YouTube. So those of you who do not perhaps see yourself as having the voice for singing in the classroom, although I know you all do, this is a great way to introduce children to songs at the same time and for them to see it at home. In fact, what happens, we can even make it technology. What happens when you read a text and you hear it at the same time, but it's read to you. It's assisted reading, a recorded reading. Carol Chomsky wrote about this in a seminal study almost 50 years ago. What happens when you teach kids decoding, but they're not still making progress? Then what do? Her answer was reading fluency. What she did was with these children, again, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, was she recorded material on cassette tapes. And then she would give children the book and the tape and say, come back and see me when you could read this material on their own. She wanted to give children a chance to read lots and lots of material. The activity came to assume something of what an experienced reader does, right? Reading material that is at their own grade level. What she found was in less than 4 months, 15 weeks, the children gained over 8 months in reading, doubling the progress that you would have normally expected them to make. And it wasn't in simply reading faster, they were reading with better comprehension. Another study very similar came out of New Zealand by Merlin Pluck, a teacher there who over the course of 27 weeks did the same thing. 15 to 20 minutes a day, children would read and listen to a recorded text. What she found was children making, again, keep in mind, 27 weeks, over 2 years progress in reading. Another study just recently was done here in the United States in Texas. Now, apparently we got a new name for it, ear reading, but it's the same thing. You notice the headphones and the student is reading it on a iPad here. Same thing though. But again, what this teacher found in Texas was when students did this on a regular basis, nearly every one of her students identified as dyslexic ended up passing the state reading exam in Texas, the state of Texas assessment of academic readiness for reading. 100%. There's something very powerful about reading something at this and hearing it at the same time. And then we get into practice. What happens when you read something? Well, you just practice it. You become fluent at anything, whatever you practice at. But I'd like to talk about two kinds of practice. The most common kind of practice we use as teachers is wide reading. That's where you read something, one thing after another. And clearly that's important. That's the kind of reading we do as adults there. And that's been found to be one of the best predictors of reading achievement among 7-year-olds and among 15-year-olds, the amount of reading. But there's this other kind of reading. Oh, by the way, the key to wide reading is access to lots and lots and lots of materials. But there's a problem with this. Wide reading generally is supposed to work like this. You read something one time and it makes you a slightly better reader. And then you move on and on and on. But sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes it's more like this. Those of you who are working with struggling readers, it's more like this. You read something once and you just don't improve very much, but you move on to the next text and, well, that one's a little bit harder, so you're actually going downhill and you're just kind of bouncing around the bottom. For these kids, we need to do deep reading or repeated reading. They're reading something more than once. We say to students, guys, we read this once and we didn't read it very well. We need to read it more than once. And here's what the research tells us about this repeated reading. Let's take that passage A and we'll have students read it 3 times. And as you can see on my chart here, with every reading, they got better. They improved in terms of fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, everything improved. But you'd expect that because they're practicing it. It's what happens next. Now we move on to passage B. Now B is more difficult than A. So we should expect kids to actually go downhill because it's harder. But notice the big red arrow, they actually improved. How could that be? B is more difficult than A. Well, the only thing they did between the first reading of B and the first reading of A was they practiced A. So the only thing you can attribute, that practice, that growth in B, that big red arrow, was the practice in A. Something was carrying over. There are words in A that show up in B. There's that sense of confidence that comes from learning to read something well. Well, to make a long story short, now we move on to passage C. C is more difficult than B. And again, even though the passages are getting more difficult, what we see is growth. This is science. But the question is, how do you actually get kids to engage in repeated readings, right? You simply don't tell students, read this 5 times, tell me when you're done. You're going to get children rolling their eyes at you. What what is the art part of this is performance. The science says repeated readings. The art question is, how do you get kids to do this? My answer is performance. Have you ever been in a play or recited a poem at a poetry slam? I bet you rehearsed. And if you did, I bet you wish you had. This talk I'm giving you right now, guess what I was doing earlier today and last night? I was rehearsing it because I want to do as good a job as possible. I call this the art of teaching reading, art of teaching fluency. And are there certain kinds of texts that are meant to be read out loud, performed? Well, going back to what I shared with you earlier, poetry, song lyrics, readers' theater scripts, they're meant to be read out loud. They're meant to be read with expression here. And again, if it just kind of highlight the importance of poetry and song, I actually wrote about it in an article in a blog called The Rob Review. Why poetry? Let me count the ways. I was able to identify at least 12 ways why poetry should be part of our reading programs. This is our reading clinic at our university, and every one of those charts there is either a poem or a song. Our children learn to read it, a new one every single day, and you have to practice it, right? In order to get to that point here. We have some poems where children perform as they write their own poetry, and they perform it as partners. We have celebrations where children go outside and they sing songs. This is here July 4th, of course, here in the US, that's our Independence Day. And of course, we celebrate America and we have the children sing songs. This is a songbook about America that our children have practiced and now are performing for an audience of parents and community members. Even in my own family, we have a Zoom night every Sunday night. I have 4 kids who live all at different parts of the country. And every Sunday evening, we get together. But every Sunday morning, I will find a poem on a website and I'll assign parts. And then when we get together on our family Zoom night, they will have rehearsed. And then we have a little performance every Sunday night. You might see that young man there in the bottom right-hand corner. That's my grandson, Carter. At the time, he was a second grader, a 7-year-old, and he just loved being the star of the show, performing for his family and friends there in that Zoom thing. So all different ways of doing this, but again, poetry. I love poetry because it's so easy to find poems. Here's some websites that are my go-to websites. Poetry for Kids by Ken Nesbitt, who's was the children's poet laureate in the United States. David Harrison, David is another poet. Sarah Holbrook, these are poets here in the US that you can easily access and get their poetry. A lot of it is just fun stuff. And what happens is children can write their own poetry. This is Taylor, who wrote Diddle Diddle Dumpling. He took that nursery rhyme and wrote his own version. Diddle Diddle Dumpling, my son Fred slept all day on his bed. Woke up at midnight, screamed, there's a monster under my bed. Diddle Diddle Dumpling, my son Fred. There. And to see Taylor, this young boy who didn't want to be in a summer reading clinic, perform this for his grandma and grandpa and mom and dad and family members on the last day of our reading clinic was really quite spectacular here. If you follow me on Twitter during the school year, every Friday, I call it Fluency Friday, and I will post poems that children and teachers can learn and perform together. Last month, we had National Apple Pie Day, so I found an apple pie poem there. For Mother's Day, I performed or showed a Mother's Day poem. And so these are things that children can learn and perform actually at home then for their moms and dads once they learn it. But to learn a poem requires rehearsal. Rehearsal is repeated reading. Here's a little routine, the way we do it here in our reading clinic, and I would suggest you do it in your own schools. Every Monday, assign a poem to different students in your class. As I said, you can find them everywhere. Every Monday, then, you read the material to your children, model it. On Tuesday, invite kids to read along with you, choral read. On Wednesday, have the children practice in small groups. We're talking 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes. On Thursday, have a dress rehearsal, and on Friday, have the grand performance where all the children perform. You know, can you imagine dimming the lights in your classroom, putting up a bar stool and having the children perform one after another, not only for themselves, but to invite guests, other children, or the school principal, parents to come in. It can be a great thing. What we find is this actually works. The research is out there. I was working with a teacher of 9 and 10-year-olds, Lorraine Griffith, a few years ago. She did this in her classroom. And what she found is doing this routine on a weekly basis, children gained over 2 years, made 2 years growth in reading, her struggling readers, in the 1 year they're in their classroom. Now let's think about that for just a second. Being a struggling reader means by definition, you had been making less than a year's growth for every year's worth of school. Now her students are making over 2 years growth, the 1 year they were in her growth, more than double that you would normally expect. Again, I've been hearing from teachers all around the country who've been doing this. Here's a teacher who talked about finding her kids making upwards of 20 percentage points improvements in word recognition. In fact, this was a thing on Facebook just last week from a teacher friend of mine who's an interventionist. She was working with adolescents who were reading at an accuracy rate of 70% and 70 words correct per minute. And what she got them to was reading at 140 words correct per minute with 98% accuracy. What did she work on? Basically what we just talked about here. We worked on phonics using word ladders, or she did, and also working on fluency using that mega book of fluency. So these are the tools, and I'm going to share one last tool, and then I'm going to turn it over for questions here. And that's that notion of phrasing. If you recall that sentence, the old man, the boat, good readers, you read in phrases. Poor readers read in that word by word manner. How can you help kids with phrasing? And I'll just focus on one thing, high frequency words. High frequency words are common words, and I use the Fry Instant Word List. You can find them again on my website. The first 100 words, you can see them right here. They represent about half the words you and I will ever read for the rest of our lives. And the first 300 words represent about 2/3 of all the words that we'll ever read. So how do we teach these high frequency words to kids? Well, first of all, lots of reading, right? You're going to encounter those words. Put them on word walls, practice them with your students, play word games, practice them at home. You know, children who are on summer vacation. This is something parents could easily do. But how about if we teach them as phrases? You know, the problem with teaching words in isolation is the word is not the natural unit of reading. It's the phrase. You know, define words like if, of, the for me. By themselves, they're limited. They have to be part of a phrase. So how about if we take those high frequency words and teach them as phrases? The people, write it down, by the water, near the car, my mom and dad, over there in the woods. You're doing two things at the same time. You're number one, teaching these high frequency words, which are so important, but you're also teaching them in the context of a phrase. So their students are not reading them as the people, write it down. They're chunking them together in a meaningful phrase. I've had teachers all over the world actually who've been telling me this is a great way of developing not only the high frequency words recognition, but also this sense of phrasing. If you're interested, you can find them on my website again, timrasinski.com under resources there. I know some teachers who actually teach them as PowerPoint slides. Can you imagine these phrases throughout the week as an opening day activity? Okay, class, we're going to work on this one here. The people, write it down, by the water, my mom and dad. Every day, doing it a little bit more quickly so kids begin to recognize the phrase, just as you recognize that phrase United Kingdom as we did earlier. So these are things that we can do to help our children working on those key elements. Modeling fluent reading, assisted reading, whether it's choral reading or reading with a partner, wide reading, repeated reading, and phrasing. Those are the tools. And the key is, you know, to find ways to put these into our classroom here. I'm going to bring it to an end here because I know we're going to be running out of time, and I don't want to. I want to make sure that we have a few minutes for some conversations to answer some questions. So, Christine, I'm going to turn it back over to you here. I'd love to come back. I have much more to say about reading fluency and word study, but as you can say, I talk as fast as I can, and I still can't make it all the way through.
Absolutely brilliant. I loved that. And I love the way that you work. I think it's fantastic. Really made me smile. Again, about your choral reading. When I'm not a teacher, but I write and I go visit schools. And when I get them reading along to a poem, and my latest one was Address Plastic Pollution, and they all do love reciting that, getting up together, and it gets children up reading aloud that would never ordinarily get up, the teachers say. So it gets them all involved, and as well, you get good messages across as well. So I think that really, really works.
Yeah.
And so now I found your everything that you said brilliant. The poetry side, again, I was a struggling reader. I struggled at school, and the poetry is what got me engaged. There was a short burst of words. And I think this works really well on the poetry, a lot of the work that I've done. So fantastic. Really love listening to you.
Yeah, that sense of success too, the fact that even if you're a struggling reader, you can learn to recite a poem or a song, in a matter of, minutes, 15, 20 minutes, but you have to practice. That's the key.
You do. And it gives confidence as well. It's amazing, going to some places where I've been into complex needs schools, all different kinds, and it's really brought some of them out, and it's really rewarding to see, and the teachers too, and teachers do a fantastic job. I'm just going to go over to a few questions because I don't want to steal the thunder of these people who want to ask the questions. So we've got Laura Brown here saying, how would this work in secondary schools? As a former primary teacher, I can see how it works in lower years, but in secondary, they work so differently during English. I can do this during intervention, but I only get 15 to 20 minutes per student.
That's a great question, because first of all, you recognize that you have students that get into older students who come to you as non-fluent readers. Then what do? Well, what we have found actually is it's essentially the same thing. The thing you change is the text that you have kids learn. So, there's wonderful poetry that's out there for adolescents and teenagers, and for even adults for that matter, and bring that into the classroom. There's really something that's quite spectacular about students, older students who have developed that ability to perform an older poem. Yeah, poetry by Robert Burns, perhaps, or Shakespeare. All those. I love this poem by Robert Service, a Scot who went to Canada and wrote about the gold rush in Canada. He wrote The Cremation of Sam McGee. There are strange things done in the midnight sun by the men who moil for gold. The Arctic trails have their sacred tales that would make your blood run cold. The Northern Lights have seen queer sights, but the queerest they ever did see was the night on the marge of Lake Labarge. I cremated Sam McGee. Now, if you want to get adolescents interested, talk about cremation. The poem actually goes on and on. It's actually a narrative poem that goes on. But again, it's that challenge for students. Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm 13, 14, 15 years old. I'm not a very good reader, but I can learn to read that poem and then perform it for my classmates. Is that confidence, as you mentioned. So that's what we have found with our own students, simply finding that material that they would want to learn.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you, but again, think about song lyrics too. There's actually been research done. This was actually done in Hawaii, where we had high school struggling readers learn songs that are age appropriate for them. They know some of the song lyrics because they've heard them on the radio, but now it's simply a matter of overlaying the words. And now, again, developing fluency, and the research was really quite promising there.
Okay, so Laura says, wonderful, thank you. There's a lot of Victorian poetry and Shakespeare work in exams, and that's what they struggle with. Great suggestion. So someone else here that had a comment here. So Gaurav Dubey, he suggested that he gets them rapping when he's teaching, and punching the air with year 9 students, all boys, engaged really, really well. So that's a comment from Gaurav. So yeah,
that's a great way of actually adding to the prosody.
Exactly. So it's
want to emphasize words, use your body.
Yeah, so it's finding material that they're actually going to be engaged with. I know I use a rapping poet, Donovan Christopher, at my literature festivals, and he engages children and adults alike, and they all really get engaged with what he's doing. He's brilliant. So it does make a real difference, definitely. Okay, so is there any more questions here that we can see along here that I've missed? Anybody got any more questions before we've got probably a couple of minutes before it times out? Is that, yeah, we're going to have to cut that off there. I've just been told. Okay, right. I have been told.
May I end with a poem?
Pardon?
May I end with a poem?
Yes, yes, you can. Yes,
All right.
go ahead.
One that I often end with, because my mother actually shared it with me, it's called success. And I want to wish great success to all you out there. I know the work of teachers, it's the most important work we can do here. And I want to wish you success. And I'd like to share the words of Ralph Waldo Emerson, an American philosopher this is attributed to. It goes like this: success, to laugh often and much, to win the respect of intelligent people and the affection of children, to earn the appreciation of honest critics, and to endure the betrayal of false friends, to appreciate beauty, to find the best in others, to leave the world a bit better, whether by a healthy child, a garden patch, a redeemed social condition, to know that even one single life has breathed easier because you have lived. This is to have succeeded. And then, as my mother told me many years ago, she said, and Tim, this is to have been a teacher. So thank you all for being teachers. I wish you great success in the important work that you do.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tim. That was absolutely amazing. We love you dearly. I love you.
Thank you, Christine.
Thank you, everybody, for taking part. And if you want to leave any feedback from any of the sessions that you've seen today, we'd love to hear that. But for now, we thank you so much, Tim, and thank you, everybody, for logging on today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.